Just as a reminder, friends, there's only 24 hours left to invest in my friends over at the Chilling app's Grassroots Fundraising Republic page. And Chilling, as you know, is a new home for horror, where users and creators interact to create quality horror narration content, and soon there will be much more with Chilling 2.0, and you're going to want to invest and get in from the ground up. You'll find a link down below. I've been an amateur runner for coming up on 10 years now. I say amateur and I mean amateur. I suck at it, but the benefits to my life have been immeasurable. Thankfully for you, I'm not about to shoot off at the mouth about how great running is. That's not the point of the story. The point is that instead of going to the likes of the Common, where all the cool kids run, I run along west to east and back again along the Charles, and I run it at night too. I have kind of a weird job, which we better not get into right now, but it means one of the only periods of the day where I can actually fit a workout in is relatively late at night. Anywhere from between 8 p.m. and midnight is my prime workout time, and unfortunately, that time slot has gotten me into trouble on more than one occasion. Surprisingly, jogging at night doesn't make you quite the target you think it would. The later you run, the crazier people assume you are, and I've had some bad hombres move out of my way after thinking, who is this crazy old SOB? But on one or two occasions, little groups of wayward ruffians have tried to put a stop on my evening exercise, and one time, I almost didn't walk away. Thankfully, the intervention of a kind stranger meant I did get to walk, or rather jog away, but I soon discovered that this stranger was anything but benevolent. So, picture the scene. It's about 10:30 at night on a beautiful New England summer's eve, and yours truly is sweating balls while approaching that outdoor gym near the university. I make it past the gym, only to see a group of young hoodlums having planted themselves firmly in my path. Now, like I said, a lot of the time they'll just move out of your way, either out of respect or out of caution, but these kids seem to have had a very bad day, and wanted nothing more than to blow off a little steam by bullying a defenseless old man. They blocked my path, started throwing all kinds of jokes and insults my way, and as much as I want to just tell them where to go, I know that'll only make the situation worse. So instead of a harsher tact, I'm saying mega cliched stuff like, I don't want any trouble, guys. I'm just working out. Be a pal, come on, don't mess up my times. They're having none of it, making all kinds of rude comments while one straight up threatens to take my wireless headphone off of me. They cost me a couple of $100, so I definitely wasn't the biggest fan of that idea, but as the situation got more and more tense, I started to wonder if I shouldn't just toss him and run to save myself from getting my butt whooped. Then, right as I'm thinking things are about to get hairy, some total stranger steps in and diverts the attention away from me. He starts calling them a word for coward that begins with P, telling them to pick on someone their own size. He seemed either very drunk or very confident of himself, and within less than a minute, the attention of my potential attackers was drawn solely to him. It seemed like something of a miracle in the moment, and I'm not sure the guy even knew what he was doing. By that I mean I don't think that he jumped in to rescue me. I legitimately think that he just wanted to fight somebody. Now, anyone who buys into the Beantown stereotype might tell you that describes about half the population of Southie, but that's not strictly true. But at the same time, I have never lived anywhere where confrontations turned to violence with such frightening speed. I watched as this guy drew all the attention away from me, to the point where when I did finally put some distance between us, the group didn't even notice. The last I saw was a little bit of shoving, but I turned my back and started jogging away again as soon as things got worse. To me, as soon as the guys that had stopped me were done with the crazy boxer dude, they were going to turn back to me again. It sure as hell made for some great motivation, and I remember laughing a little as the nice lady voice in my running app told me, "You hit a new speed record. Keep it up." I ran for a little longer, walked for a while, then jogged again, until I finally reached the spot that I normally took a rest at. I walked across the street to a little place where I knew the bartender, got myself a glass of water and some peanuts for energy, then killed maybe half an hour watching just random sports highlights. The idea was to kill enough time that whatever went down on the esplanade would be all over and done with by the time I ran back. I appreciate I could have just taken a different route, but I guess that's why they call me stubborn. So I leave the bar, walk back over to the esplanade, and begin my jog back towards Beacon Hill. When I start getting closer to the area I was accosted, I noticed that there was still a large group gathered near the spot where I'd almost gotten into trouble. Obviously, I slowed down to a walk, trying to work out if it's the same guys who gave me trouble. I can't recognize anyone, and besides, everyone was leaning over the side of the esplanade, looking down into the Charles. Because my head was all fried from running, I couldn't work out if it was the same spot or I was looking at a completely different incident further down or up from the spot I was at. So I walked over, asked somebody what was going on, and found the answer hit me like a ton of bricks. There was a body in the water. No one seemed to know how or when they'd gotten there, but they didn't seem to be conscious. I remember taking another look around just to make sure that I wasn't in the same place, but I was. I was in the exact same spot as I was when I stopped by that group of guys. Like I might have already mentioned, running just makes my brain slow, so it took me way longer than it should have for the proverbial penny to finally drop. But it did, and I realized that there was a good chance that it was one of the guys that I'd seen that had ended up in the water. Good chance, sure, but I still didn't know for certain, so I tried my best to get a look at the body. I know that seems really creepy of me, and it definitely wasn't my proudest moment, but I just had to know. I had to know if someone had died over something that started because of me. I mean, call me crazy, but I just felt so guilty in the moment, especially because I'd just run off to eat peanuts while someone had potentially lost their life. Whoever was down there was bobbing in the shallow water, and combined with how dark it was, it made it impossible to discern anything except the shape of the body. From what I heard, someone had already called the cops and the relevant people were on their way to deal with it. After that, I slipped away without saying anything, and it was only the jog and its after effects that kept me from overthinking the whole thing during the rest of my evening. The next morning, though, that was a different story. First thing I did was call my son to tell him everything, but the main reason was to ask him to use Google to try to find something about what happened. I wasn't the most computer literate back then, and I'm not great with all the more intricate functions, so I didn't really know what to plug into Google to make it an accurate enough search. I know that might sound crazy to some of you younger folks, but you just gotta wait until you're my age and you need your grandson to help you figure out your new flying car. By the end of the day, my son had sent me 3 different news pages, each detailing what was known about the body in the Charles. The identity had yet to be established, but 2 of the sites seemed to confirm that the person had drowned after being knocked unconscious and tossed into the river. Police were urging witnesses to come forward, so that's what I did, partly out of duty and partly out of guilt. I understand that the group of guys in the crazy box were both looking for trouble and that it wasn't my fault that they'd found it. But when I think of that night, I think of how I just ran away. I feel as if though it was going to be me that ended up floating in the Charles that night, and somehow fate stepped in to stop that from happening. I guess some people might just be happy that it didn't happen to them, but for me, it comes with a real bittersweet kind of feeling. I'm glad it wasn't me. I just wish that it didn't have to be anyone else, either. This is the story of the single most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. Now for reference, I'm a 39-year-old woman and I was 35 at the time this happened. To call me petite would be putting it kindly, and as much as I've been working at my weight training over the years, my gains aren't anything to write home about. I was 35 in 2014 and I was living down in Florida at the time to help take care of my grandparents. Not far from where they live was this big old park, maybe 3 miles around, and while I lived down there, I used the park as the route for my Sunday jogs. A lot of other folks use the park too, especially on the weekends, so to beat the crowds, I would run early, like very early, like 6:30 in the morning early. I'm not trying to show off. My job has a very early start time too, so that's just my default sleeping pattern anyway. But if I run pretty much any other time of the day, I just don't get the space that I might have otherwise. The only trouble is, being all alone as a female jogger comes with its very own set of problems, as I'm sure you know. You can avoid most of these by running early morning and never late at night, but as I came to learn, sometimes trouble doesn't sleep. I was about a mile into the run, feeling slightly more tired than usual, which really sucked, but oh well. The track I was running on was right next to the road, with the only thing separating the dirt track from the road being a line of sidewalk. There were very few cars on the road, given how early on a Sunday it was, so when this beat-up looking pickup truck drove past me and honked, it really took the wind out of my sails. I really hate getting catcalled or honked at when I'm running, even if it's just guys trying to be nice, I guess. I hate to sound like an F&B here, but it is what it is. I'm in my zone, focusing on my breathing and not tripping over anything. Just don't take me out of my focus. As I said, the guy honked, kept on driving, and I cursed him out in my head as I went. It had been a long time since anything like that had happened, so it just kind of hit a little harder. But I kept running, trying to use the anger to push myself a little harder, and just carried on with my morning workout. Then, maybe 5 to 10 minutes later, the same truck drives past me again. I heard him before I saw him that time, honking really loud as he drove past me as close to the curb as he could manage. I just broke. I had no idea what the guy's problem was, if he was still loaded from the night before or whatever, but I slowed down, threw up 2 middle fingers, and just started cussing the guy out. But I swear, the second the first curse left my lips, he slams on his brakes, pulls over, and jumps out to confront me. I couldn't believe it. Like I just couldn't believe anyone could be so petty. I pulled out the one headphone I actually use, in time to hear him ask, "You got something you want to say to me?" I briefly debated on saying yes, before giving him a huge chunk of my mind, but just from the way the guy was acting, I knew this wasn't going to be civil. The guy had spotted a lone female jogger, repeatedly antagonized me, then jumped out of his car, apparently ready to fight a woman, the moment I gave him any pushback. He obviously wasn't playing with a full deck, and then the moment I took a step back, he started to run at me. Breaking into a full sprint to get away from the guy amounted to the most terrifying few moments of my life. I was convinced that he was going to catch me, completely convinced that at any second, I was going to go tumbling to the ground after he tackled me or kicked my legs out from under me. The thought must have been like rocket fuel to my legs because somehow the guy didn't catch me. And you can bet your butt that he was chasing me, though. I could hear him barking all kinds of abuse behind me as I went. There came a point where he sounded audibly out of breath, and that spurred me to run even faster, knowing that I was going to be able to get away. I don't know if it's some kind of irony or whatever, but it always strikes me that although running so early on my own almost got me into trouble, it was all the running I'd done before that which allowed me to get away from the guy. You think there might have been a moment of celebration or something, because there was definitely a point where I knew that he wasn't following me anymore. But instead of stopping and calling the cops or something, I just kept running and running until I was completely and utterly spent. When I stopped, my legs felt like jelly, and I basically just collapsed onto a patch of grass, panting heavily and totally in shock. I felt like puking, but I held it down, and then out of nowhere, I saw another jogger running up to the track towards me. I'd run into the park, if that makes sense, so I was no longer exposed to the road the guy was driving on, but I still didn't feel safe. I still thought the guy's truck was just going to appear out of nowhere, even though that was probably impossible. I think I was still in shock when I told my fellow jogger what had happened, and she immediately began to call 911. Then, in between talking to the operator, she said to me, "You're safe now, sweetie." And I just started welling up. Then, before I knew it, I was crying in the woman's arms as she talked to 911. I've never been chased like that, not by anyone who I really thought was trying to hurt me anyway. I didn't know I could even get that scared, that out of your mind, kind of terrified that you can only remember in still frames afterwards, like your brain is trying to block it out. I tried to pull myself together as quickly as I could, and for the longest time I lied to myself and others about how much I let it affect me. I stopped running as frequently, confined my cardio to treadmills and ellipticals, and It had a terrible effect on my overall fitness. I didn't change my calorie intake either, in fact, and I think I ate more due to the stress and trauma, like my body's way of stopping it from happening again by making me too unfit to run. Facing the fact that I was hurting became a hurdle all unto itself. I didn't want to admit to myself that some random psycho had instilled this terror inside of me, but he had, and as one doctor phrased it, I was, quote, having a perfectly normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. I made some quite large strides in my time before I moved back to Hartford, and I didn't run any kind of long-distance outdoor routes until I got home again. The cops basically made it clear that without any kind of ID on the guy, there was nothing they could do about it. And even if they could, they would only be able to book him for threatening behavior or something along those lines. If I'd have chosen to go running around that same park again, there's a chance the exact same thing would have happened again. I guess I'm trailing off the point here and straying into topics that are way too complex for just one person to figure them out. I just hope that one day, lone women can enjoy outdoor exercise without having to think about their safety like that. But I also have a feeling that day won't ever come. Not in my lifetime, anyway. The summer after I graduated high school, my mom helped me get a part-time job at a little diner about 4 miles from our house. The pay was a whole lot, and I was putting away almost everything I could in the hopes of buying a second-hand car before the end of the summer. I didn't spend a single cent unless it was necessary, but since my shifts tended to end pretty late, it put me in an awkward position. Spend a chunk of wages on cab fare, which was going to be way higher at that time of night, or I could jog home. Now, I wasn't very athletic at this point, but the need to save money made it a real convenient time to start. So I pulled out some old sports gear, brought them to work with me, then started running home 2 or 3 times a week. It really sucked at first, and a few times in the early days I threw in the towel and took a cab home. But after a while, as it got easier, I started getting a buzz of how much more stamina I was getting. It got to the point where I'd time my runs on my Casio stopwatch, and sometimes I'd make a game of trying to run the fastest time I could. Part of my route involved cutting through the middle of this big piece of parkland, and I mean right down the middle too. And the first few times, running through there at night was just really creepy. It got less scary as time went by, as the place was mostly deserted by that time, and it wasn't in any gang territory or anything, but even so, I'd take out one of my headphones before running through just to be safe. Then one night, right as I was getting pretty comfortable running through the park, I heard something that turned my blood to ice. I'm about a third of the way through and I hear this ear-splitting, blood-curdling scream coming from somewhere in the darkness. Because I'd taken out only my right headphone and the sound was coming from my left side, at first I couldn't tell where it was coming from, and that made it all the more frightening. I stopped in my tracks, pulled the other headphone out, then just stood there under the streetlight, extremely freaked out. I remember kind of pulling myself together and telling myself that it was probably just a fox or something, because they make incredibly creepy wails at night sometimes, I'm sure you know. But then right as I start to think about starting up jogging again, I hear the same scream, only this time I can pinpoint where it's coming from. If I'm honest, my gut feeling was telling me to just keep running, because whatever the reason that scream was, it had to be really bad. But at the same time, I knew it was pretty much down to me to do something about it. It really did feel like fate had singled me out to be like, are you a piece of crap, or are you not a piece of crap? And as scared as I was, I chose not to be a piece of crap. I walked off the lit path into the dark, straining my eyes to see where I was going at first. Being under the streetlights had totally ruined any natural night vision that I'd had, so when the next big scream came, it was so close that I swear that I almost peed my pants. But by that point, I could actually hear that the scream was coming from someone really young, and before long, I spotted a kid just sitting under a tree, completely in the dark, just like breathlessly crying before wailing every so often. If I had to guess, I'd say that they were maybe 9 or 10 years old, definitely still around elementary school age for sure. I was actually worried about scaring the kid, but he barely reacted at all when I finally asked him where his mom and dad were. He just looked at me, still in tears, and made some gestures that I couldn't figure out. All I could do was just try my best to calm him down and hope that he wasn't seriously hurt in some way. If he was, he sure as heck wasn't telling me about it, and again, I didn't want to have blood on my hands because I didn't get the kid help in time or something. I kept trying to check him for blood and was relieved when I couldn't see anything, but that didn't mean that he didn't have like a burst appendix or something. You see where I'm going with this, internal injuries and whatnot. When I finally get the kid to the point where he can talk to me, I try to break the parent's question down into two parts, seeing if the words mom or dad elicit a better response than just parents. I ask him super slowly, "Where is your dad?" The kid just shrugs and says, "I don't know where my dad is." Then I ask him where his mom is real slow, and get this. He says, before totally breaking down into tears again, "I don't have a mom anymore." No, in the moment there was a part of me that thought maybe it was all just some childhood antics. The kid and the mom had a fight, the kid declared that he was running away, like a lot of kids do at some point, and then he gotten lost and scared in a dark, creepy park. I started telling him, "Sure you do, buddy. We just need to get you back home so we can sort this whole thing out." He starts shaking his head like, "No, no, no, no," then breaks into tears again. So I have to work at calming him down all over again. Finally, I get him to a state where I can ask him if he knows where he lives at, and the kid says yeah, he does. I then ask him to show me, and after a little convincing, he gets up, takes my hand, and then starts leading me off towards where he lives. The first sign that I realized something was really wrong was when the kid basically led me across the street to his house. He wasn't lost, and when we got closer to what he claimed was his front door, I saw it was wide open. Right away I'm thinking, uh-oh, because this isn't exactly like taking the kid to the front desk at a supermarket. I have no idea what had happened in that house, and I know that the door being open at like 2 a.m. was definitely not a good sign. First thing I do is walk the kid away from the house into a neighbor's place. I was worried that this might freak the kid out more, but he didn't freak out. He just kept on sniffling, probably just in shock at that stage. And this is right after my parents bought me a cell phone too, mainly for emergencies, so as I'm hammering away at the neighbor's door, I'm also calling 911 to let them know that I thought something really bad had just happened to this poor kid. The neighbor had opened the door, armed by the way, and he had heard the whole exchange with the dispatcher. They got the kid into their house, then totally against what the dispatcher had told me, which was to stay away from the kid's house if there was a suspected violence situation going on, the neighbor comes back out, strapped up, and runs over to the kid's house. I'm telling the guy to stop, knowing that if the cops just show up while he's still inside, he could end up getting shot. He just told me to tell them that he was inside if they showed up. Like the cops don't just shoot first and ask questions later if someone has a weapon, and then just went ahead and crept inside, gun drawn, like he was friggin' John Wick or something. I don't know if I was expecting to hear shots or screams or whatever, but like a minute later, the guy came out again, eyes all wide, saying, "We got 2 bodies in there," and making comments about how bad it was inside. And that's when I realized that when the kid said, "I don't have a mommy anymore," he really meant it. I think he'd actually witnessed whatever had just happened, but was just too messed up to actually say it. After a while, the cops showed up. I told them what I knew. Then my part was all played out. They were more interested in talking to the neighbor who had gone into the house, just so they could get an idea of the layout. All they did with me was take my name, address, and phone number, just in case they needed to talk to me, as I guess they had what they needed right in front of them. I finished my journey back home, half running, half walking, in a state of shock. That when I got home, I was completely exhausted, but I couldn't manage to drift off until almost dawn. The adrenaline was bad enough, but when I was wondering what was going to happen to that kid, that got my mind racing over and over. I remember hearing about it on the news later, but it wasn't like I was calling around to all my friends to be like, "Yo, that was me they were talking about." People found out one way or another, but for a while back then, I just didn't want to think about it. It's been years now, and the kid must be nearing the age I was when I found him that night. I hope that he's moved past what happened and managed to make a life for himself somehow. But if that kid really did witness his mama getting shot by her boyfriend, all before he turned the gun on himself, then I don't know if there's a kid alive who would come back from seeing something like that. I've been running to keep fit for a couple of years now, and I honestly can't recommend it enough, but seeing this kind of reminded me of something I feel that I need to share. I got into running during the summer of 2019, and over the next 6 months or so, I made steady progress with my fitness. But the winter hit hard, and it sapped my motivation to run, especially around Christmas when good food and strong drink were plentiful. But then come New Year's Day, I was back out in the park, running my usual laps, determined not to lose any of the progress that I'd made. But as it turned out, so was everyone else. The park was way busier than usual, and I swear that at least half the people there were jogging. But one of the things that really stood out to me was just how gassed people look. A lot of them were obviously brand new runners and were getting back into it after a period of time off because there was a lot of coughing, spluttering, and leaning up against trees and all that kind of stuff. I've got a bit of a weird habit of cheering people on when I see them like that. It happened to me when I first started, just some random old men on a walk through the park who told me, "Don't give up, son." And it gave me this massive boost, and I know some people find it a bit irritating, but I think it's a net positive. Anyway, I'm basically having the time of my life, cheering people on, generally getting inspired by all the people trying to make a change and better themselves, and it was just great vibes. Then the next thing I know, I'm rounding this blind bend, covered up by this big evergreen bush of some kind, and I see someone just lying on the pavement in front of me, eyes closed and just completely still. I stopped dead in my tracks, literally stunned by what I was looking at. There was a second where I thought the guy was just talking the mickey, as they say, and that my call of "Are you alright, mate?" would be met with some bantering reply or something. But there was nothing. The guy stayed completely still, eyes closed, totally unresponsive. I went into full-on panic mode, forgot every bit of CPR training I'd ever been taught, and instead just stood over the guy shouting, "Hello, can you hear me? Open your eyes." When he didn't respond, I called 999, and as I was giving the operator all the details, a few more people came around the bend and started helping out. It was a big relief to have the other people on the scene, but it definitely got a bit chaotic too. Some were suggesting that they put the guy into the recovery position, while others were rightfully stopping that and saying not to move him because his airway seemed clear. I kept passing information back and forth between the operator and the other people tending to the unconscious man, so, like I said, it was all very chaotic and stressful, with lots of people trying to talk over each other all at once. And even through the din, I heard it when some panicked woman's voice called out, "I can't feel his pulse. I don't think he's got a pulse." Luckily, someone had showed up who actually knew CPR and started working on the bloke after clearing some room. Seeing the CPR man actually do chest compressions sent people over the edge. It's been mad up until that point as it was, but I don't think people realized just how serious the situation was until the chest compressions started. People started walking away, covering their eyes. The woman, who'd noticed the lack of pulse, burst into tears. It was extremely difficult to watch, and I found myself having to turn away in order to keep a steady thought in my head, because I was still on the phone with the operator at that point. Moments later, I heard the ambulance sirens, so I hung up the call to help guide them in. After that, there was nothing that we could do but watch, and the absolute last thing I wanted to do was to help turn some guy's final moments into a freaking spectacle. The last thing I saw were the paramedics loading the guy onto a stretcher and into the back of the ambulance. I have no idea what happened to him after that. In the days after, I kept checking Google and local news websites for any sign of the collapsed runner, but I didn't see anything. This happened in Sefton Park in Liverpool, by the way, on New Year's Day of 2020, so if anyone happens to be able to dig up the story, I'd be really appreciative if you could leave a link in the comments or something. The guy has a shaven head, but then a bit of a ginger beard, and I think he was in his early to mid-20s. I'll have to look myself after I send this, and I know some of you are probably thinking, why didn't you check before you even started this? Well, the thing is, I haven't been able to bring myself to. I've thought about that little incident many times over the years, and I've run past the same spot countless times since, but I've never been able to bring myself to sit down and just Google it again. I know why that is, too. I'm not going to pretend my own mind is a mystery to me in some hacky attempt at dramatic ambiguity. I haven't Googled it because if the guy died, I know it'll horribly upset me, and this selfish sense of self-preservation just keeps me from doing it. That runner probably left his house or flat that day, wanting to make a change for the better. 2020 could have been his year, but instead, he might not have survived the first day of it. The fact that was his reality, even if he did survive, it just makes you realize how lucky the rest of us are, who make it through our daily lives without some unforeseen medical disaster occurring. Anyways, I've rambled long enough, I think, so let me get to the point. If you're thinking about beginning a fitness routine this year, please, there's no shame in taking things nice and slow to start with. Wrap up warm, take a water bottle with you, and go at your own speed, no one else's. Running buddies are a great idea, and if you can find one your level, even better. But lots of experienced runners won't mind slowing down a bit just for the sake of helping you level up and learn a thing or two. And trust me, some of us would welcome the break. Just don't be that bloke that I found that morning, lying cold and alone with no one to help him at first but some gobsmacked runner who barely had a clue what to do. What feels like a lifetime ago now, I was stuck in an abusive, manipulative, and highly toxic relationship. It's a story familiar to many other survivors. The details vary, but at the core, it's always the same. Girl meets boy, boy makes girl happy, girl marries boy, and boy turns out to be a monster. I value honest men, even the jerks among them, because even at their very worst, an honest man will tell you who they are, even if you have to read him through his actions and not his words. But a narcissist, especially one with sociopathic tendencies, is evil enough to know that they have to play at being Prince Charming right up until you're trapped. And sadly, that was the man I married. Getting into the abusive relationship is the easy part, and getting out is the opposite. Some women have luck with the police or social services, while others just disappear in the night when their abuser is passed out drunk. Some seek refuge with family or friends, but then there's the women who, for whatever reason, don't have any of that. And again, that was me. I'd rather not go into how I ended up alienating almost all of my family and friends over the years, and how I thought my ex-husband would improve his behavior if we just moved out of the city and into the middle of bloody nowhere. In reality, that was just another bit of psychological sleight of hand. He didn't want to move to lower his stress levels. He wanted to move so he could completely socially isolate me. For some victims of abuse, the move to socially isolate them is the final stage before some catastrophic occurrence. By that I mean either her abuser murders her or she kills him in self-defense. 90% of the time, it's the former and she ends up just another statistic, but in my case, I got really lucky. But my good fortune came at someone else's expense, and they paid the ultimate price so that I might live. It's something I've struggled with for years, and please forgive me if I'm not very liberal with details here, but I live in constant fear that my ex will end up tracking me down somehow. But I suppose at this point I should just get on with my story. It started with some routine session of verbal abuse. Whenever I did something that my ex deemed wrong, he'd go into one of his moods. I'd had an argument with boyfriends in the past, but they're usually over and done with as quickly as they start, and there's always a bit of kissing and making up at the end. My ex, on the other hand, his anger would come in waves, and what would normally be a minor disagreement among other couples became an entire morning of verbal shellacking. But then this one morning, I made the mistake of talking back, and this earned me a bloody lip, and after smashing a few plates and glasses on his way out, my ex announced that he was going to pick up our weekly food shop. These runs took an hour at the most, as I came to cherish what little time I had to myself. But that afternoon, an hour came and went, and by the time my ex had been gone for 3 hours, I was really starting to worry. Any sort of change in routine or unexpected event usually spelled trouble for me, so As opposed to just enjoying my extended alone time, I felt like a condemned man whose execution loomed at any minute. I remember checking my phone to see if there were any roadworks or traffic jams anywhere in the local area, and that's when I saw it. There was breaking news on the BBC News app, saying that there had been some kind of horrible accident. Then when I checked where, it was only a few miles down the road from our house. As I read through the article, which was only short, it said something about a suspected vehicular assault, which described how a driver had apparently deliberately rammed their car into a group of joggers running alongside the road as they were raising money for charity. And I just knew. Don't ask me how, but I just knew it was my ex-husband that was responsible. Or maybe it was just wishful thinking in the moment, but it was wishful thinking that came true. The news said the police were still looking for the driver, and as the evening wore on with no sign of my ex, it became more and more obvious that it was him. The confirmation came when the police released details of the car they were looking for. It was the exact make and model my ex drove, and this presented me with something of an opportunity. So I took it. I called the police, told them I thought it was my husband and that I believed that he'd return home sometime during the night. The police sent a pair of officers over, and that was the first time I told anyone about the situation that I was in. Don't ask me why, but I'd spent years hiding the truth from my friends and family, more for my ex-husband's protection than anything else. But then one day, after some freak event, everything he'd built came tumbling down. The police officers stayed with me until about 1 in the morning when they got word that my ex had finally been arrested. Before they left, they assured me that I could press charges, but that if it was indeed my ex that was responsible, the vehicular assault would take priority. That ended up working for me, as his trial for domestic battery took place whilst he was in the prison for the crime he was eventually convicted of, which, as you can guess, attempted murder. The result was that he ended up going to prison for quite some time. Not nearly as long as I think he deserves, but it's still better than nothing. Once he was inside, I got on with claiming my life back. It was a long and arduous process. Even though I was rid of him, he still found a way to carry on making my life unbearable. I had to face friends and family that I hadn't seen in years, some of whom I'd had very nasty fallings out with, mostly off the back of things my ex had done. I'm still not the person I was before I married him, and I know I'll never really get that kind of innocence back. The best I can do now is use what I've learned to make sure that I never make that same mistake again. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content. My hometown has a kind of bad reputation and a kind of undeserved one. I don't think I'll name it, and maybe y'all can make a game of guessing which one in the comments, but I don't want to sully its good name any further, so I'm gonna keep it anonymous. Maybe my perception of my hometown is slightly colored because I live in a nicer neighborhood. It's diverse, multicultural, all that good stuff, and the crime rate happens to be pretty low, especially for violent crime. Then one summer's evening, I was out running during the golden hour when I was suddenly struck by just how incredibly beautiful it was. The main part of the regular jogging route ran down one of the old boulevards, sandwiched between two one-way streets in this wide island-type deal. There's a cycle track, a track for pedestrians, then flower beds that separate the two. I'd run on either one depending on how busy it was, and on this one time, I was running on the cycle track right up near the edge of the road. There wasn't all that much traffic, otherwise I wouldn't have been jogging so close to the street, and as I was saying earlier, everything looked really pretty. Not just pretty either, peaceful too, really peaceful, and as I soaked it all up while sweating my balls off, I thought to myself something like, you know, this place gets a bad rep. I wish more people could see this right here. They wouldn't be so quick to... My thought was interrupted by the sudden appearance of some total G-ride coming down the street towards me on my right. It was real low to the ground, windows tinted dark, all matte black paint job, and it was coming up on me really fast. Then right as I'm noticing how tricked out this thing was, I noticed a cop step out from the front yard of one of the houses on my right and throw a spike strip into the street. The G-ride flew right into it, and the bang from the tires was so loud that I heard it over my headphones. And as it spins out of control, it careens right in my direction, mounting the curb and almost smashing right into me. If I hadn't seen the whole thing coming, like if I'd had my back to the whole setup and crash, I'd be typing this story with the angels right now. I then watch as a bunch of cop cars appear, with all of them piling out of their trucks and cars to pull guns on the dude as he tried to run away. Homie just limped out of the car when they finally got the door busted open, then some big cop just, boom, tackles him and puts the cuffs on him. Friends of mine knew who it was, as the guy's name was all over social media while his government name was on the news. I'm not all into the gangsta stuff, though. I'm more Attack on Titan than Chiracology, but after that day, I kinda understand why we have that kind of reputation here. Violent crime is a problem all over the country. It's a worldwide problem, really, a global problem. It's just here, it had a tendency to just come out of nowhere and happen in places that should really always be safe. This is the story of how I got scared of dogs. I was jogging through the park one day, down this long stretch of pathway, and about 2/3 of the way down, there were these two middle-aged women just talking to each other, and one of them had this big old dog. Now, it's not unusual for a dog to get kind of excited when joggers run past them, but it's usually just an innocent, is it time to play kind of reaction. I don't stare at them or run too close, but it's not like it's any different from the usual caution people exercise around strange dogs. It's mostly just not to inconvenience their owner by not distracting their pet. So when I see this big dog turn to look at me, I start drifting to the opposite side of the path. The lady with the dog had her back to me and was talking to a lady who was sat facing me on a bench. The fact that dog's owner had her back to me was probably what triggered her dog so badly, because the closer I got, the more agitated it seemed to get. I'm not good with dog breeds, but this thing was really big and really shaggy. Like, I want to say it was a wolfhound, but I can't be sure, and nor am I in the mood to really look it up, so the dog gave off a bark as I got too close, and all its owner did was kind of shush it. Then just as I passed, it took off after me. I'd kept a side eye on the thing, so I knew when to speed up to stay away from its jaws, but what I also saw was this huge dog literally dragging its owner with it. That was the only thing that gave me a head start. The fact the dog owners kept a hold of its leash for a few seconds, probably sustaining some nasty injuries in the process. I mean, she fell hard, and this kind of spinning backwards motion too, so however she landed cannot have been pleasant. Like I said, the dog literally dragged her for a few feet, making this horrible scraping sound that accompanied the woman's scream. But then, she let go of the leash. I honestly don't know how I made it to the jungle gym without being bitten. I know the dog got awfully close on more than one occasion, but I managed to hop a little fence and climb up a jungle gym before turning around to see it, right there on the ground below me. I tried to jump once or twice, and I felt myself slipping off this metal dome structure as I attempted to kick it as it jumped. And that's where we both stayed for God knows how long. The dog's just barking at me while I stayed put at the top of the jungle gym, and I swear to God, all it would have taken was one really good jump and scramble from the dog, and I'd have been done for. But thankfully, the big dumb thing figured that I was like a cat up a tree or something, just unobtainable. The worst thing was how at first, no one did anything to help me. There were other people around. This was a weekend afternoon in a city park, but everyone was either too scared or too concerned with their own business to help. It literally took a minute or so of me screaming for help before anyone decided to try and grab the dog's collar or something. Most other folks ran straight to the dog's owner, who had been dragged and who was still lying on the ground when someone calmed the dog down and I'd gotten away from it. I suppose that was the right call after all. I walked away with just a nasty scare, and if I had to guess, the dog's owner either broke a bone or incurred some kind of nasty injury from all that. All in all, it made for one of the single worst days of my life. Not just because of the dog encounter, but because I felt partially responsible for that woman getting hurt. I know I can't control how her dog reacted, and if it was well trained, it Wouldn't have reacted like that at all, but at the same time, I still can't just absolve myself of any responsibility. And that means I now have a very mild case of cynophobia, or fear of dogs. Not so much because of how dangerous they are, but how dangerous they can become in the hands of a lazy or careless owner. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST. And there are super fun live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. I'd love to see you there. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, or send one over email and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, you just got rolled by RJ Duck and Associates.